Welcome to IB Unplugged, a Cognity podcast for IBDP educators that tackles your submitted challenges and questions by connecting you with experts and peers who share their ideas and stories from real classrooms. Whether you're a seasoned educator or new to the IB world, each biweekly episode and guest aims to equip you with practical tips and positive inspiration, helping you teach with more confidence, creativity, and joy. So whether you're walking your dog or commuting to school, hit play and join a community of educators ready to learn, laugh, and thrive in your IB journey.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of IB Unplugged, where John and I have the absolute pleasure of speaking with John Hattie. So this guest needs no introduction for many of you. He's one of the most influential researchers and authors in the field of education. He's worked on visible learning and many other books and research projects as well, all around evidence-based learning, bringing this to the forefront through all of his meta-analyses, really being able to help teachers and educators improve teaching and learning through really understanding the strategies that work and don't work in the classroom, and really talking about all of this evaluation and reflection of how you do your craft. So John is somebody that we have from the very beginning wanted to interview and get on the show. His work has shaped so much of what we do at Cognity. We've had so much influence from his studies and his work on how we've built our product. John, I think most teachers have been impacted one way or another in their teaching. So we are so excited for this conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I realized, we've got John Hattie on the show, I did do a little bit of a jump around and dance a bit. I was pretty psyched. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation where, I think as educators, you constantly look into what's working, what's not working. How can I be a better teacher? How can I really teach in great ways? And I think what we can look forward to in this show with John is flipping that a little bit. And let's stop focusing on what's teaching well, and let's start looking at the learning. How do I know that learning's taking place, and what's a really beneficial thing there? So we're going to be going through different strategies for how to make sure that you can actually see learning taking place, what you need to do as a teacher to create the conditions so that people feel safe and included and ready to genuinely and authentically get into that learning process. So I think there's going to be some really excellent things here, regardless of if you've read all of Hattie's work or you've spent a lot of time in the Visible Learning book or something like that. This episode, I think, is going to dive deeper into what we can do as educators to create really safe, inclusive learning spaces where kids can be authentically themselves, curious, driving into their own education themselves. So stick around. We're so glad you're here. It's going to be a great episode. And here we go with John Hattie. Hello, John Hattie. Welcome to IB Unplugged. We're so excited that you're here today.
Hello, John Patton. It's wonderful. I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it a lot. Obviously, you've had some pretty amazing impact within education, and we're excited to talk a little bit more about some of the studies, some of the research you've done, looking at ways in which, teachers can know their impact and how we can be doing more efficient stuff within our classrooms. So let's dive in. And I think you mention your name kind of anywhere in education and people are aware of it. They know of some of the stuff you've done, but people might not be aware of kind of your start and a little bit of your background. So every expert kind of starts somewhere. I wonder if you can share a moment in your own teaching career where maybe things didn't go as planned or how it maybe changed your approach.
Yeah, John, I started all my career until the last 10 years. I'm a psychometrician. I teach those courses in research design and statistics that you loved, right?
I loved them. Yeah, t-tests and all those samples. I was a big fan.
And in the first few years, I realized that many of the students had an anxiety when they saw a number. And they were fearful of making mistakes. They succeeded or failed on the opportunities I gave to them. They didn't make connections in them. Many of them walked away disliking statistics more than they started. And it took me a while to realize the problem was me. The problem is that I didn't deal with the anxiety. I didn't acknowledge it. I didn't set up, for example, the right assignment so that they saw it as valuable. So I switched the assignment, and I remember it was, think about creating an assessment that you want to use in your own work. And that became the focus rather than the statistics and the research design. And suddenly there was a purpose. Suddenly they were not as fearful of making mistakes. They saw me as someone that was going to support them to create a really good assessment they could use in their subsequent thesis or whatever. And so that was kind of an epiphanal moment when you realize after a few years of blaming the students and seeing that as a lack. And as a good educationist, I came up with all the reasons why they weren't going to succeed. And it was like a moment of, hey, I think I'm the problem here. And so that didn't go to plan. And it certainly changed my approach looking at, which subsequently turned out, not then, but subsequently turned out my laser focus on the impact we have and looking for the evidence where it doesn't work as well it does work.
Yeah, I think so often we kind of get focused on like, oh, I'm doing the right thing or I've done the research on it here. But, turn the mirror around for a little bit and take a look at yourself and go like, what am I doing that's actually working and how do I know or not? Yeah.
And we fit people into our beliefs about the world. And I have this silly theory that a lot of academics study their weakness. And my first thesis was on creativity tests. And I think that's probably a litmus test of how I needed to be better at making connections between ideas and making connections between what I was doing and what the students were doing.
Yeah. In all of your research, you do a lot of work on the hows, and I think it's also really important to focus on the why. And so I was wondering if you could answer, in your view, what you think the purpose is of education.
I'm at the luxury stage of life now. I'm a granddad, and I'm watching my 7 grandkids. 4 of them have started school in the last few years. And I have this very strong view, Courtney, that our job is not to create their futures. They're going to create their futures. And our best chance is, whilst we have them, to initiate them to teach them the value of what we consider is valuable in our lives and our world, knowing that their job is to, in many ways, disrupt that. So disruption is part of the purposes of education. I also, with all my own, I had 3 boys, with my own 3 boys that went through school, I just wanted them to have a passion. Yes, I wanted it to be socially desirable. And yes, certainly the high school years, their passion was sport. They did not go to school for academics. They went for sport. And I was happy with that because I know that the best predictor of adult health, wealth, and happiness is not achievement at school. It's the number of years of schooling. And so I think one of the purposes of education is to make schools inviting places where kids want to come and learn. And I think when you look at adults and ask them, as we've done in a study, tell us about the best teacher you ever had and why. 2 reasons. That teacher turns you on to their passion, or that teacher saw something in you didn't see in yourself. And this is why I don't think the job of schools is to help kids reach their potential. I think that's an incredibly low aspiration. Our job is to help kids exceed what they think is their potential. And so, I could go into a lot of education jargon about I want to maximize the impact of teaching on learning. I want to develop visible learners who know where they're going. But that notion of turning them on to learning, giving them the skills, of course it relates to learning about something, which is why we do history in English. But if you look at, for example, in the US and ask how many adults use high school trigonometry, algebra, calculus, 2%. How many use graphing in Excel? 75%. Sometimes I think we create too much stuff, and I wish we had cut back amount of stuff so we can go deeper. Because let me ask you, John and Courtney, I bet if I said to you, what is the most fun learning thing you ever learned when you were at school, I bet it was something you went deep on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it wasn't like a simple pop-up question in the lesson or something like that. It wasn't like a little quiz. It was for me, we were going really deep into human anatomy and physiology, and we were exploring why. Why does this thing work the way it does? And I was able to relate it to, I had a passion for sport as well, cross-country skiing, and I did a lot of racing there. And so I just immediately saw this connection. I was so happy that my teacher saw that too. So just as you're saying here, I'm smiling because I'm like, that's exactly what turned me on and made me feel like I, just as you said, belonged in my school. Is my teacher recognized this is something that you like, this is something you're interested in. Let me tell you more about it that can help you engage deeper into this. So yeah, that's it. I love that. I'm really glad you brought that up. Go on, Court. What about for you?
The first thing that I thought of, actually, I promise I've liked school since then, but in second grade, so I think I was about like 8 years old, we transformed the entire classroom into a pond. I'm from Florida, so swamps and ponds are a bit more prevalent for us. And we decorated the entire classroom. Everyone had to pick a different animal to make and dive super deep. Like I have an absurd amount of knowledge about a beaver to this day because that was my animal. And we like had to live in this pond classroom for what feels like a month. It was probably only a week. But yeah, it was that full immersion, deep dive into one specific thing that definitely stays for a while.
So why on earth do we come up with every curriculum review, we add more and more to it, all our tests are about the facts and the knowledge, when that's not what turns people on to be learners?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what I love about just how you've answered these first two questions right away is it's very clear that it's about developing a passion, and it's very clear about introspection and kind of evaluating yourself and recognizing like, I might not always be right. And I think that's a huge thing that when we're trying to convey this idea of like young people to be, good thinkers. I want you to go into the world and think carefully about stuff and be interested in things and think about it. It's important to then recognize, I might not know all this stuff here. And I guess to a certain extent, as teachers, we've got to model that, right?
And like I've spent my life in academia and I still enjoy being curious and curiouser. And as you say, trying to understand, why is it so? Why is it not so? And that's the core evaluative question. And a lot of my work at the moment is looking at this notion of evaluative thinking. And particularly in this day of AI, we have to have our kids evaluative think. Is it good enough? Is it right or wrong?
Right.
How do I go about critique? How do I seek collaborative versions of this? And what's fascinating is if you want to see it in action, go into a class of 4-year-olds. It's ever around you. By the time they get to 8, they're into what's. They're into compliance. And like we know from the Jenkins work that by the time they get to high school, at best, 4 out of 10 want to be there to study the stuff we teach them. We haven't got it right, but there are some stunning classes out there that do get it right. So I think our biggest problem is not excellence. Our problem is we don't have very skill at scaling up when we see excellence.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I love that because there's this young passion that kind of starts out almost at toddler age where it's just why that, why this. And then sometimes I feel as educators, a DP coordinator, and I work with mainly 16, 17, 18-year-olds. There's almost an element of kind of beating that out of them, not intentionally, but just like, no, you have to tell me what, and you have to tell me how, and then you have to analyze it in this respect. And I guess that's to the end of trying to get people to dive deeper into it and analyze it more. But there is an element of like, am I teaching you, the student, how to be curious, how to ask the right questions, how to evaluate? Just as you said, is it good enough? Like I recognize, and I think you've mentioned this before in your work, and I was listening to another show that you've done, and this concept that like the teacher asks the vast majority of the questions in the classroom instead of flipping it and allowing the student to ask the questions and start to really think like, is that answer good enough for me? And I think you've hit it right on the head right now in this age where AI and ChatGPT and these things are so readily available. If we're not teaching that introspection and that evaluative thinking, then I think we're missing the mark, right?
Well, isn't it kind of ironic that ChatGPT is called chat? We've got to teach chat to it. We've got to ask the right questions. And if you ask the wrong question, you get a result and it looks convincing. But let me just be a little bit careful here because I'm greedy. I want both. I want the students to have knowledge, particularly on AI. If they don't have the knowledge, they won't have any understanding of whether it's right or wrong or good enough. So I want the what and the why. And I think one of the problems that we quickly jump into in education is we bipolarize them. You can have direct instruction, explicit teaching, or you can have problem solving. You can have the what or the why. I want the balance. And this is why when I said before about what did you go deep on? You got a lot of knowledge when you study beavers. Probably more knowledge than you'll ever need.
More knowledge than I ever need.
But you did it for a purpose. And one of the purposes, why? Why are they like this? Why do they do this stuff? How do they fill the dams? Why are they sometimes ecologically destructive as well? So don't get me wrong. I want both, but I think it's getting that balance.
Mm. So greedy there, John. We can't have both of these things at the same time. Well, I mean, I think most people would know Visible Learning. That's a pretty landmark book that you put out. But obviously, you had lots of published work before then, and you've done plenty of work since then. And I'm kind of interested in taking a step back from all the things that you've published and just understanding what made you decide to embark on the journey in the first place? Was it just that curiosity of why do things work the way they are? Or was there a deeper purpose thinking we could do education better?
It wasn't deeper purpose. No, it wasn't that. It was, as a statistics measurement person coming into education, I was an outsider. And all my colleagues told me that if I was going to be successful, I had to study a particular topic, and it was always the particular topic. And they're all so different. And then I met teachers, and they did the same. All you have to do, John, is come and watch me. And they're all different. And as I was a kid, teachers are dramatically different. How come everything in education works? And it was kind of fascinating because that was not my experience as a student. I had some pretty horrific teachers, some pretty good teachers. I had the mix, and I think most of us get the mix. And so, and again, when you ask adults to remember their best teachers, the modal number they remember is 2. And we had 50. So we've got a problem. The other coincidence is I started my career at the same time that Gene Glass invented this thing called meta-analysis, which is a statistical way of synthesizing literature. And the best way to learn about it was to do one. So I did one, and I enjoyed it. I did another one. And there was that pivotal moment, and I remember it, sitting in a colleague's office at the University of Washington one August. What if I put the two things together? What if I used the meta-analysis studies to change the question from what works to what works best, to ask the relative question? And then I got going on that, and it took me 20, 30 years to collect all that data. But the hardest part was the why, because I set up what I think is a very strong counterfactual. I said, okay, what are the common elements of those influences above the average compared to those below the average? And that's what took me 20 odd years to work out. And I literally wrote that Visible Learning book to get it out of my system. I thought, okay, I moved to New Zealand. I was in measurement. I developed the New Zealand assessment scheme with some colleagues. And I had this sitting in the back and thought, I'll sit down. And it took me a few years. And I have a holiday house when I was in Auckland. So every time we went down there, I played away with another influence. I never expected it to catch on. Guys, it was my 10th book. What happened to the other 9?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it definitely caught on. That's for sure. I mean, like I said, it's kind of everywhere that's out there. But you kind of bring up something that I'm interested in, because I'm also I'm doing a doctorate right now, and I'm studying quite a bit, and I'm looking into different meta-analyses themselves. And just kind of interestingly on the side, I mean, education is a very, very social, subjective sort of space. You need to understand how the classroom works, the context, what's going on within the students. And sometimes some people might say that when you put that to a number, you're kind of missing a lot of what's going on there. And I'm just kind of interested in such a social subject. How have you found that tension of being kind of more a statistician and kind of looking at this from meta-analysis and data points versus maybe people who might critique that and say, well, no, look, this is a classroom. This is interaction between people and relationships. You can't really quantify that. How did you kind of square that circle?
Well, we can quantify it, but let me come back. The best criticism ever. One of my colleagues, Alison Jones, many years ago, heard me give this talk, and she came up afterwards with the best criticism ever. She said, John, I'm impressed that you know what happens in classrooms to the second decimal point. And so one of the things I've been doing over the years, and I tried to do a meta-synthesis of classroom observation. My wife developed a tool, an iPhone, to collect observation with incredible accuracy, and we've got a large number of students. And very soon, someone you should have on your podcast, Peter Blatchford from England, is producing a book on his career where he actually has done what you're talking about. He's gone into classrooms. He's looked at what happens in the classroom when you change class size. What happens when you have a teaching assistant? And as he showed, teaching assistants have a 0 to negative impact. Why is it so low? What happens, one of the things that fascinates me, guys, is we put kids in groups and we teach them as if they're a whole class. We aren't very good at group work. He's looked at that. So I think, John, what you're doing and what Peter's doing and what Ned Flanders did many years ago, not the neighbor of the Simpsons, but the real good sociologist,
No, nobody thought that right now. Nobody was thinking about The Simpsons when you said that.
And getting into all that kind of classroom, it's really quite exciting. Now, here's the good and the bad news. What can happen now, people have already done this using AI, is automatic coding of classrooms on the spot, because it's very expensive to do, takes a lot of skill. AI has secured that. Now, the good side is that I think we're going to get a lot more data about what happens in classrooms. The bad side is going to be incredibly misused. And I think there's kind of all kinds of tensions in there. But yes, you're right. I think I'm looking forward to someone writing the visible learning book from inside the classroom perspective. And guys, I could be wrong.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, at least at this point, what do you think is one of the most misinterpreted takes on your work that you're kind of coming up on time and time again?
Well, firstly, at the last minute, I added a ranking of the FX in the book. And it kind of got a lot of attention. But it probably was one of the misused parts of the whole thing. And since about 2017-18, I've stopped using those. You won't find it in any of our work, the rankings, because people thought that each of the now 400 influencers were unique. And my argument was the opposite. What's the overlap between those above and those below? The second is people thought, we're doing the stuff at the top, we're not doing the stuff at the bottom. Some of that stuff at the bottom should worry the heck out of us. And so if you're asking me what specific findings, the one that still surprises me, teacher subject matter knowledge. Surely you should know your subject matter, and that would make a difference to the quality and effectiveness of your teaching. It doesn't. Now, I've spent 20 years, 6 studies, trying to understand it. You've got 1 minute. Accept the evidence, guys. Why does teacher subject matter knowledge not matter?
I do. I actually really love that argument there. I've been spending a lot of time on this. I understand it. Just trust me on this one. I think that's quite useful too. But no, I really love that. There was a teacher I worked with a while ago who taught history here, and she and I would talk often, and she was like, I want to go into all these different classrooms and try to teach there, because I don't think it's about subject knowledge. I think it's about good teaching tactics and that sort of thing. And so we always kind of bounced around the idea. And I remember there was one time where actually we did flip, and I went into the history classroom and she came into the biology classroom. But
how did that history lesson go, John?
I'm so good at history. People, were really impressed.
No. Let me pursue that for a moment, John, because you're on to the answer here. What subject do you teach? You teach?
Biology. And
what happened when you went into that history class? How did you prepare?
Yeah, I mean, I really reframed what I thought was important within teaching. And I think what I loved, you just mentioned it a moment ago, you said I could be wrong. And I think that's something that I have really tried to take on in the last, I guess over my career. And just recognizing that I don't know everything and I don't have to know everything. I need to be able to educe, to bring out what my students might know and what they could understand. And so when I went into that classroom, I just really thought, what are the prompts? What are the questions, the ways in which I could get these kids to kind of engage in this and tell me about it? Because hey, I'm walking in, I'm not a history expert, but I can get you to know some stuff. I can get you to explore what you already know and then verbalize that to me. So it was really about, kind of flipping it around and being like, I hand up in the air, I'm not the expert. Tell me about it.
Yeah. And I guess that's the idea with when you have the subject matter expert, it's a crutch that you can lean on and that you're not going to feel the need to it's like, I have all this knowledge that I just need to impart on you, rather than like being a bit more critical of like, what do I need to do with the class? How do I make this more interactive? Because it's not just I'm the expert and you need to learn from me. It's we need to create this environment where we're all learning together. I think that probably changes things quite a bit.
You're kind of getting there in terms of what we ended up, Kelly Pickett did this.
No.
You could just say no, John.
Nope.
Both are wrong.
I worry, John, when you were talking there that you're almost accepting that it was okay that subject matter knowledge doesn't matter. But
I was actually suggesting it's better not to have it.
No, I'm saying the evidence shows it doesn't matter. That doesn't mean to say that I'm advocating that you shouldn't worry about it. In fact, I worried about that because that was your question. What have I worried about and surprises me? So Kelly went into classes of 5 and 6 year olds and she measured teachers' knowledge of the science of reading. She also monitored what was happening in their classrooms. And so if you can imagine, she had teachers that had an incredible amount of knowledge on the science of reading and some that didn't have much knowledge. But what happened was the interaction with what happened in the classroom. In the classroom, if you are a teacher where you talk 89% of the time, you ask 120 questions a day that requires 3-word answers, you don't allow kids to ask questions, you point out mistakes to kids and ask them to fix it, then subject matter knowledge is irrelevant. You only need to be 1 page ahead of the kids. But if you talk less and get the kids to talk more, if you allow the kids to ask open-ended questions, it exposes you dramatically, and subject matter knowledge matters dramatically. So it's an interactive effect. Like, we've spent close to $1 billion here in Australia over the last 15 years taking maths, primary teachers out, giving them more maths and science. No effect, because they go back and teach the same way. You've got to worry about the teaching. So does subject matter knowledge matter? Yep, in a particular circumstance, when the nature of teaching is much more dialogical. It doesn't matter when it's monological. So that's what I love doing. And like, I'm working at the moment. Why does having an animal, a dog in a classroom, have quite a reasonable effect, 0.2, 0.3 effect on achievement? And I've delved into that and looked at it in 1,000 ways. And my best explanation is it's got nothing to do with all the articles say, the dog is calming and kids like the dog. It's simply the teacher and the nature of the teacher that chooses to have dogs compared to those who don't.
So dog people are better people.
Yeah, that's what I heard. Dog people are better than cat people. That's the point.
Have a horse in the class and see what happens. But the other one, and I'm not going to go into it, is class size, trying to understand why it's a small effect, which it is. But the other one that's probably more germane to what we need to talk about today is that, and many others have shown this, and I'm just replicating it, the biggest source of variability is within your school, whereas all our debates in education are across schools. And I ask you, in your school, you know you have teachers with variable impact. We don't solve it. We look over and say, no, the problem's the curriculum, the problem's the resources, the problem is the leadership, the problem is the schools down the road. The more you can start looking at it, and that's what we do in our work when we go into schools and we do implementation. And of course, you've got to do it with high trust. If you do it shaming and blaming, you know what's going to happen. So you build high trust, you form a coalition of those that are having high impact, and you invite the others to join. That's the biggest issue. That's the hardest issue, but that's the one that keeps surprising me, is how often politicians, parents, educators see the problem as the school down the road.
Are you an IB educator wanting to improve your practice and needing just a bit more support getting there? Have you ever wanted to learn more about a specific aspect of the DP program, or ask a question to an educational theorist about a specific IB aspect? IB Unplugged is the place for you. Simply visit cognity.com/IB Unplugged to submit your question to us and have your question explored in more detail in an upcoming episode. And now, back to the show.
Okay, I want to dive into that a little bit more, make sure I understood that. So often we are saying, let's fix the curriculum, or let's look at the what's happening next, as opposed to, if I heard that correctly, we want to make sure that teachers feel safe and able to essentially say what you said. I might be wrong about this, and how can I get better in my own teaching in an authentic way that's non-threatening, that allows them to essentially reflect on best practice and change the way that they're doing things in the classroom. Did I get that right?
Except for the last bit. I couldn't care less. I couldn't care less how you teach. I think one of our faults is we've been obsessed with teaching. I'm obsessed with the impact of your teaching. And it's a totally different set of questions. I want to know what you taught well and what you didn't teach well, who you taught well and who you didn't teach well, and how much growth you've got. I want to see the evidence about that. I want to see the evidence from the test scores, from the kids' assignments, from their assessments, from the teacher noticing the student voice. I also want to hear a compelling argument, because it's less what you do and more how you think about what you do. So in our jargon that we're using at the moment, we want evaluative teachers. We want evaluative students who ask the same thing. And of course, being greedy, it is about something. But I think our mistake is we've been too obsessed with teaching and we're not obsessed with learning. Mm-hmm. For example, in the 12,000 teachers that we have in our database from our classroom observation, 12,000 hours, which is almost a kid's lifetime at school, how many times in that 12,000 hours does a teacher think aloud or ask a student to think aloud? 0. I call my work visible learning, not because learning isn't visible. Our job is to make it visible, and we don't. Mm-hmm. And I think this is really my obsession. I want classrooms to be about learning. Like, your kids are sitting there all the time and saying, how did you do that? And we tell them, we don't think aloud. When was the last time you made a mistake in a classroom and talked about it? And look, I know in our Western world, we don't want to embarrass kids. We don't want to affect their self-esteem. So our niceness kills us. Like my 4-year-old, who I babysit every week, he makes mistakes all the time. He points out my mistakes. We talk about it. There's no embarrassment. That's called learning. I watched my 6-year-old. She said, "Granddad, you've made a mistake. You've got it wrong. Do it again." As if it's a punishment. Come on, guys. Why aren't we having schools as learning organisations? Why do we keep going on about teaching? Now, again, I'm greedy. I do want both.
But what I like about that is it's more about framing the position of mind for the teacher there. So we're shifting how we think about, like, well, one, if I'm thinking aloud. So students brought up a question, something like that I don't understand. Okay, let me walk it through. Let me kind of invite you into my inner thoughts as I think about how this works. And then, what I love there is that sort of mistake. So if I make a mistake or I mess something up, how do I approach that mistake makes a big difference in terms of how the student feels in terms of their comfort with making mistakes as well.
Like, no kid comes to your school to learn that which they know. It's what they don't know, but we don't privilege that. We punish it.
Yeah. I think that what we're talking about here, it also makes me think in a lot of our other episodes, there's been a lot of times where we've laughed at the difference of the expectations of the student versus the expectations of the teacher. And one of the things is this reflection piece, this feedback piece. And I know that that's something that you've also thought a lot about and reflected about. A lot of students will maybe show their work or do whatever it is. They turn in papers, they get feedback. They're supposed to be reflecting on their learning and thinking about it. But then how often are teachers forced to do the same thing?
And how often do we teach the kids how to reflect?
Yeah, which I think in the IB, there is a really strong element of wanting to teach them how to reflect. But I think there's also this idea that the teachers should also be reflecting, and schools need to make the space for that too. So I was wondering if you could just kind of talk about that, of the idea of how impactful, because it seems like with a lot of your work, you're saying like a lot of the learning happens when the teachers are learning from the feedback as well.
And a lot of learning happens when students are listening to each other, for good and bad.
Yeah.
And like, as you said, with IB, and there are quite a few programs around the world where they teach those skills. Now, the argument we put is it's got to be taught in the context of the subject. It's not a generic skill. Being critical and reflection in math is different to being critical and reflection of English because the content matters. And so looking at that, and I have to say, I'm not the greatest fan of the concept of reflection. Like Graham Nuttall showed, 80% of what happens in a classroom a teacher doesn't see or hear. So why would I care about their reflection on the 20%? A lot of novices don't know what they don't know. So why would I privilege what they can reflect on what they know? I want to also help them critique. I want to help them reflect. And this is like, there was a great meta-analysis a few years ago on student control over learning. Zero effect. We don't have control of our learning. You don't have control over your learning. I listen to other people. I go to classes. I read books. Now, I have other resources out there. And so the metaphor we use is we want kids to be taught how to drive their learning. And sometimes that means seeking help. And that's something that's often not welcomed in the classroom when kids seek help. Like when you ask a kid, did you understand it? And they say, no, could you explain it again? When they've said that the 5th time, and I watched this in a class in Nome in Alaska last year, this kid asked, no, I didn't understand it. And I thought, oh, she's going to get told off. And the teacher, without a blink, explained it a different way. He says, do you understand it now? She says, no, I don't. 4 times. She said no. And then she said, I think I'm getting it. That is too rare. And it's that notion of that exploring aloud. So go away from reflection and say, thinking aloud, exploring aloud, wallowing in error, and like, think of it the same way that kids play their computer games and their video games. They want multiple opportunities. They want feedback. They want to know what success looks like so they can use the feedback. They want it to be high trust. They don't want errors as seen as mistakes. And all of us, no matter what, we love the 80 kind of 20 rule. 80% we know, 20% we don't. That challenge is the most exciting thing. We need to challenge our kids.
I want to pick up on what you mentioned just before with regard to, you want students to be the drivers of their learning, and kind of what you were alluding to there, kind of knocking on the door of this idea of almost inquiry-based learning, right? And
students driving with their questions. They're figuring out, here's what I want to know next, and here's how I kind of make that happen. Now, I teach in an area where inquiry leads to a lot of this, but there's some difficulties with that too. So I wonder if you could comment on like, when and how do we approach inquiry-based learning? Because as you've said before, content matters. They've got to know some stuff before they can start asking questions about it. So how do we navigate that sort of space?
We can also do the opposite. We can get kids to do problems to find out what they know and don't know, and then go and teach that. So it's not a one-way street. And extending the metaphor, like I'm writing some work at the moment of how AI feedback could revolutionize what we do, because what we're doing at the moment is we're doing what we're doing for the last 20 years better. But feedback is something that is given by the teacher, received by the student. How do we make it a dialogue? How do we make it in the moment? How do we make it about how you think as well as what you do? And there are incredible opportunities to do that. That kind of comes to your notion, John, is that we have the tools right now to be able to do this in the classroom, to create more of a dialogue. And the other part of it is you can do that in groups of students. It's not just one-on-one. Like I think using AI as individual coaching, it'll do okay, but it's not the answer. It's seeing how other kids make a mistake. It's watching Courtney and watching how she thinks, because she got it right. And I want to watch her how she does it. And I want to ask, why did you do that? How did you do that? As much as I want to ask the teacher, as much as I want to ask AI. So I think, again, it's about how we create those high trust, inviting classrooms where kids feel they belong, where it's safe to make mistakes, and then make sure there are multiple, like the great study last year, all of us, regardless of our prior ability, need 5 to 7 opportunities to learn something before we get it. Most kids get one. How do you create those multiple opportunities? So I think there's a real richness out there. And like the reason I keep going, even though I retired from my university job many years ago, is I see this in action so often as I go around the world. It's there now. I'm not talking about some utopia. And like when you look at my data and you see the percentage of schools and students and teachers that are in that zone where their kids are making more than a year's growth for a year's input, they're a stunning number. They're in your school. Excellence is around us. Why is it, guys, that educators are the best at denying our expertise? Why do we keep seeking the Holy Grail? We haven't now. We've just got to be better listeners.
That really hit home for me, because I've been kind of hearing this, thinking about this whole conversation. What I'm hearing is create a really inclusive environment where people belong. And that what you just mentioned, I think, is one of the more important keys to it. If I become a better listener, then I have the opportunity to try to draw out from the kids and help them feel more comfortable. I suppose I'm constantly talking, then maybe I'm shutting down their own personalities.
Mm-hmm. And that's true in the classroom and the staff room.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. One of the things that I think is also this balance, or maybe you're going to say greedy, need it both, is also there is a lot that people have to say about direct instruction. Either they're like, I am Miss Inquiry and I don't do any direct instruction, or they're like, you guys over there is not enough structure in your classroom. I stick to direct instruction. What are your thoughts on kind of what does good direct instruction look like in a classroom right now?
Well, firstly, like in the 2009 book, I struggled with all the different teaching methods. And it was only in the sequel that I think I worked through what was going on. And what I want to address first is the level of complexity that we're teaching the kids. Like, remember, I'm greedy. I do want the kids to know facts, knowledge, procedures, and rules. I also want them to be problem solvers, make connections, and do relationships. And it turns out direct instruction is very high effects for the content. It's quite low for the problem solving. And no surprise, the problem, the discovery, the inquiry is not very good with the content, but it's very good with the problem solving. So it's not either or, it's when. And I think we won't employ anyone on our team who says, oh, I'm a problem solver teacher, or I'm an explicit instruction, because the kids need both. And we're going even stronger than that and saying we need to separate out the assessments and have two, one about the content, one about the deep. 2 activities, 2 success criteria. Because kids learn, my grandkids have already learned it by age 8. What's valued in classrooms is knowing lots. And I want them to know lots, but I want them to use it. So the notion is it's a matter of when you do direct instruction, when you do explicit instruction. Now, here's one of the dilemmas. We know explicit instruction is much more effective when the object of the exercise is to pass a test. Because most tests, 90+% of items we ask in tests are about and measured in the test, and the feedback is about the facts and the content. I don't think that's what any of us want, and I know in IB you don't want that. So that's why I'm separating them out and saying very clear to the kids. Like, if you did my course before I retired from Melbourne, first assignment was calculating an effect size. I wanted students to do it, to see how easy it was. The second assignment was interpreting them. I wanted that too. I knew if I put them together, they'd all walk away and say, he cares about us calculating effect sizes. And I do, but I want more. And so that's why I think we need to separate them out. The more we put them together, the more the kids are smart and they realize how to play the game. Just know lots.
Nice. So what's kind of the simple win on that? Like you mentioned, it's all about when am I going to do some of the direct instruction? When am I going to be allowing the kind of deeper problem solving, critical thinking part of that? What's kind of the simple win for any educator out there in terms of how to scaffold that into their lessons? I mean, how do we achieve this?
Well, I think the answer is two. I think we need to be quite explicit to the students what we're doing. We're separating it out. We're going to talk today about the content. We're going to talk tomorrow about the interpretation. Or even within a lesson, you say like the first 20 minutes is about content, the next 20 minutes is about interpretation, back to 20 minutes about content. You can vary it by making it very clear to the students that the activity they're doing is about the content or about the processing. And I think it's also good practice for us to make sure that we're seen to value both. And I think this is, like as we developed the New Zealand assessment scheme, 25 years it's been in place. They all get an assessment for their surface and they get an assessment for their deep. It's part of every assessment. And I think this is how we need to really separate them out. Of course they go together, but if you put them together, all they care about, all they know, and all that's valued is the content. And I don't think that's good enough.
I like that. So much of what I'm taking from this right now, John, is just create a good environment, create a space where kids feel included, where they can ask really good questions. I'm taking away from this the idea of, I can have both of these things. I can be greedy. I don't have to be either or about any of these practices within teaching, but maybe it's better for me to signpost it and get a good idea of like, now we're doing direct instruction and now I want to do some problem solving and helping the kids be like aware of that one. And then two, they can possibly collaborate into that as well. I'm wondering, is there any other sort of final message or something you'd really want to make sure that people know that maybe they can't read in your books or they can't see in the work that you've published? Anything you feel like educators need to know this so they can have a really positive impact in their classrooms?
Well, the one that stunned me a few years ago was seeing the employment rate of graduates from high school and universities in the US over the last 50 years. And those students who have high content and high social skills are employable. No surprise, those students who have low content, low social skills are not employable. But in the middle, employers would much prefer to have a graduate with social skills and less knowledge than a student that has high knowledge and less social skills. I don't think we're very good at teaching students how to work in groups. I think there are very specific skills. We know from the PISA study that the thing kids hate in the classroom is when the teacher says, now we're going to put you in groups. I know what happens when I go in a group. I see Courtney or John in my group and I know they're the smart ones, so my success is shutting up, being quiet, not interfering with them. That's hopeless. As a measurement person, you have to have a score for the group work and a score for the individual's contribution to the group. And if I came into your schools and saw high-stakes assessments, not including some collaborative group work, I don't think you're making your students employable. That is not part of our psyche. That's not part of who we are. That's not part of curriculum. We see group work as something to do on the way, not taught for. And you know this as employers. When you get individual rogues who don't know how to translate, communicate, and work with each other, they're the ones you want to get rid of. And I think that's the message that I think we need to look at right now, what we're doing in our schools. And like in our world, it's a strange world we're in, and we're a very I world. We need to teach the we. We need to teach those skills. And probably the most important skill is, can we stand in the shoes of another teacher? Can our kids stand in the shoes of another student? That social empathy is so critical to the success of students as citizens and as learners.
Yeah. No, I think that makes so much sense. It's something that definitely resonates with me. I think when we're talking with teachers, as always, most teachers do want to do better work. They want their students to have a better experience. One of the things that I think blocks them a lot of the time is this feeling of innovation fatigue, I think is the way that you've referred to it, of like, if they're like, yeah, I want to teach group work, but how on earth can I add this on to everything else? And there's always this friction of, I wish I could do more. I don't have time. I want to do more, but God, I'm tired of learning new tools or new ways of teaching. And do you have any advice for teachers trying to really make room for impact besides obviously not just work harder, stay longer?
My first answer is the direct answer, and that is time is not the issue, because those teachers who are doing it have the same time, same curriculum, same kids. But then your point also is we are terrible in this business. We add on. And unfortunately, often in schools, we accept and do more and more that society wants of us. And so, as you know, we've tried to address this de-implementation. How do you stop things? And what we try and do in our practice is we do time and motion studies. We walk around and see. And it's unbelievable. Like 90+% of what teachers and principals do, they choose to do themselves. And it's not common across other principals and teachers. Let me give you a simple example. I noticed, John, on the background, you've got posters on your wall, and Courtney, you don't. Now, the example we used was teachers who spend a lot of time putting stuff on the wall. So we took the kids out of the classroom and we asked the kids what was on the wall. They hadn't a clue. Now, there's nothing wrong with putting stuff on the wall. Just don't get obsessed about it. It's not going to make a difference to anything. And so there's so many things we do. And like the number of assignments and assessments we give kids because we have to fill in the day. Like one of the major absences in my work, I think in all research, is there's very little research on how do you evaluate the quality of lesson plans, which every teacher worries about every day. Isn't it stunning? Like there's a lot of stuff how to write lessons and lesson design, but to measure the quality, and I think we've done a poor job in academia at helping teachers understand what's working well and what's not working well. But I really do strongly recommend that and they do this in every other industry, you bring a time and motion person in to see what you do. Like we know principals, they have 80 to 120 things a day, none of them planned. How do they set systems up so that things don't come to them? Now, the generous principal says, my door is always open. That's a huge mistake. It can't be always open. You'll never worry about the things that matter because all of us will dump things through your door. And so how good is your front desk at triage? How good is the deputy school leaders at triage in the system? So I think there's a lot of things here. And when you look at what teachers do, again, one of the things we say is asking them to do more or different isn't the answer. Asking them to think. Now, Tom Guskey has shown many times the way you get them to think differently is to get them to do differently. And that's where professional learning becomes so powerful.
I love this. And I'm excited about the idea of let's bring that more to our teachers. Let's bring that more to our cultures, basically our school cultures, really investigating why am I doing the things that I'm doing and how do I know that they are working? Can I be more evaluative about the practices I've kind of found myself into? And am I just here or have I planned for them directly? Yeah, you've given me a lot to really think about and consider here, John.
The one that I like that medicos do, and it's normal for them, they welcome the second opinion.
Yeah, that's interesting because we at Cognity, we do professional development with schools, and we have we have somebody that actually will sometimes go in and sit in a classroom and they'll do the classroom observations. And it's like, I haven't had a classroom observation since my first year of teaching. Or it's like, I've just been off doing my own thing. Or they'll go do professional development externally, but not in the classroom. And I think it's those kind of moments that really matter and that really make a big difference.
And it comes to the point you were just making, is that we inflict stuff on teachers to ask them to do different when many of them are doing a great job now, and we shouldn't be asking them to change. And like one of the things we find that we work in schools is, schools come and say, I want visible learning, I want this. And we say, no. What is the problem to which visible learning is the answer? And doing really good diagnosis because we know from many different studies that teachers and schools choose to improve that which they're already doing well. No wonder you get small dividends. Are you prepared to look at what you're not doing well? So we have a process we use in schools to get them to interpret what they're doing well, what they're not doing well, and we're saying, hey, we want to sustain this and we want to change this. And I think that's part of the other problem, but you say with de-implementation, what I'm saying with time and motion studies, what's the best things to stop that are not having the effect, so you can spend the time and resources and attention on the things that matter.
John, thank you so much for giving us your time, your expertise, your insights here. I think I've learned a ton right now, and I'm excited to bring some of this to our own school context. And I'm sure that I'm sure that some of our listeners and teachers right now are going to find that useful as well. It's a real privilege getting to chat with you here about these things, and I just can't thank you enough for taking the time to chat with us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
IB Unplugged is a Cognity podcast hosted by John Patton and Courtney Marlene and produced by Catalina Gaffney. Be sure to subscribe or follow and share with your fellow IB educators. If you'd like to submit a topic, request, or question, please do so on cognity.com/IB Unplugged. Let's keep the conversation going and support each other in teaching with confidence, creativity, and joy. See you next time.